Hello, my friends. Hello, everybody who's watching. My name is Stephen Mead with Domicile Real Estate for people who love houses. This is our Southern California housing market update for June 29th, 2021. I cannot believe that we're just about halfway through 2021. I think what's really interesting about this year is two things I was thinking about that are very different this year versus last year. Number one, how different this year is from last year and how much faster it seems to be going, right? Like, I mean, it just feels like, last spring, I think was one of the slowest springs I can ever remember. This year's spring, we've just blasted through it. The second thing that I think is interesting is just how we can be in such a fast-paced market that doesn't seem to change that much. And that really got me thinking about, is our model of how markets move and our memory incorrect? So we're going to kind of go into that a little bit this week when we talk about our stats. So let's not waste any more time. Just as a reminder, this is our Southern California housing market update. This is for Los Angeles and Orange counties, though honestly, a lot of what we talk about can probably be extended even to San Diego County as well. But without further ado, let's get into our market stats because I think, yeah, I think that really tells the story in the numbers. So let's go back here. All right. So, the first thing I want to talk about is total active listings. And, I'm going to talk just for a second here about how we are used to markets changing. So, you know what? I'm going to actually, sorry for jumping you guys into the charts and then jumping out, but we're used to our markets in Southern California having rather drastic, quick turns. And probably for maybe even the last 30 years or so, really, that's kind of how our markets have gone, right? Like they've done this and then they've crested over, and we've kind of done this like this kind of a wave motion. And I think what we may be finding is that this is a market that is changing. We can show that it's changing, but it's changing slowly. And I think a lot of us have been expecting from the beginning, right? We've expected sort of this other shoe to drop, right? Last year, the other shoe we expected to drop was inventory. We thought more inventory is right around the corner. And it never quite got there. It never came in that sort of rush that we expected. Now, as we've seen prices have gone up, rates have increased a little bit, I think people are expecting, well, now the price appreciation is going to stop. The market is going to turn on a dime and it is going to change. And, I just want to challenge that. I'm not saying that I don't think that could happen. I think it still very well could happen. But is it possible that maybe we've really been looking at how this market is going to change? We've been looking at through the lens of the history of markets in the last 30 years. But the reality is this market that we are in is not like any market we have been in the last 30 years. So let's jump back in here and I'll show you kind of what I'm talking about. So the first thing here is our total active listings, right? And we saw, it really has been low, right? And then maybe for about the last month and a half or so, that inventory has started to rise, but not nearly as fast as anyone would have liked, or honestly, as we would have expected. I think the prevailing logic on the street and the expectation was, sellers are going to see how much people are getting for houses, and they're going to all rush to put their houses on the market. And it didn't happen. It hasn't happened, and I'm not really sure it's going to happen. I mean, we are knocking on the door of July. I think if it hasn't happened yet this year, I'm not sure it's going to. In fact, you'll notice we even retreated a little bit, and then kind of those numbers came back up. For our $1 to $2 million, you'll notice that that's actually been a lot more robust of a growth. And that's going to be another theme we're going to see this week, is that our under $1 million market and our $1 to $2 million market are starting to behave a little bit differently. So, okay. So this is our last 14 days new listings. Again, I mean, we had, very early in January, nothing. It kind of jumped up, and then really we've just been holding in this range here. It's a little bit of a different story with 1 to 2 million. That has been just a little bit more of a steady or linear rise. But I mean, look, we got a big rise here and then nothing. We are not anymore in terms of new listings coming on the market now than we were back in March, right? I mean, it just isn't, it's just not really those big numbers that we would have expected in the spring. Now, if this is our supply side again, our markets function, how competitive our market is fundamentally down to supply and demand of housing. If you have way more people who want houses than there are houses, prices tend to go up and competition is stiff. If we look at our new escrows, again, it's the same thing. I mean, it went up. We've seen some decent numbers, but look, I mean, these have all been really in pretty much the same range. Is demand slightly softer than it was? Yes, but I mean, we're not really talking. I mean, these are single digit percentage points, right? This just isn't a huge change that we're seeing in this range. I mean, we've just kind of had this steady demand that has existed all along. And whenever we have this kind of a demand that just seems like it's the same number, I have to start asking myself the question, are we in a supply constricted environment? Meaning, if more houses were available, or rather more qualified houses that buyers want to buy, I think that's really important there, would we see more sales? And I think the answer is yes. I think we would see more sales. If you look down here for our $1 to $2 million, it's a little bit better. I mean, you see a little bit more of a rise, but I mean, really, if our difference is between 1,000 and 1,050, that's a 5% swing over months. I mean, these are such steady numbers, right? For such a market that feels so crazy, we're not seeing it be this wildly reactive market that changes a huge amount. Now, if we go back to our absorption rate, I mean, yeah, has the market gotten a little bit less competitive over time? Yes, there is a trend line of it being less competitive. But the fact is, these are not big swings, right? I mean, we were over 90% at a couple points, and now we're, in the low 80s. These are not wild swings in demand or absorption rate. They just aren't. And, for our 1 to 2 million numbers, they're a little bit lower, but we see kind of some similar trending, right? It doesn't always move lockstep, but it's a little bit lower. And it also has gone, this absorption rate has dropped, or the market's gotten less competitive as we've gone through spring, but only slightly. We're still in the 70s. It's still what I would call a seller's market, even in that $1 to $2 million range. And for the sort of primo magazine level homes, right? Those ones are going to go very, very quickly still. Now, our closed prices is kind of interesting, and again, this is a problem. I'm going to go out of here because I want to talk about why you have to be really careful when you look at these charts. So big news has happened, right? Some of you are familiar with something called the Case-Shiller Index. Case-Shiller Index is an index where they try to identify house for house, year over year changes. They try to control for, has what people been buying changed? That makeup changed over the last year. They try to adjust for that to give you a same house year over year increase. And they do this for the entire United States. And the problem that I have with Case-Shiller and kind of any of these, including our own sold data, is this data tells you what happened in the market 4 to 6 weeks ago. And if you're a buyer or a seller today, right, that's a history lesson for you. I don't know exactly how useful that is for making decisions. What you'd like to know is, what direction is the wind blowing on prices today? And we're still trying to work through a way of sifting through the data to kind of come up with that sort of a direction of the wind indicator, or an index that we can have week over week to compare and show people. So we're still working on this problem. So let me jump back in and tell you about prices, right? So we divide our price analysis into 3 pricing categories. We have our 75th percentile, which is our upper end of the market, our median or 50th percentile, that's the middle of the market, and our 25th percentile, that's our entry level. All of them showed slight declines. And if you look back in history here, you see that prices kind of do this ebb and flow thing. It's not an even rule. It's funny. I think we are seeing, when we're in an inventory constricted market, I think price is probably the only place you really see the movement, right? We don't see it in the number of new escrows because there just aren't enough houses. So I think price might be where you really kind of can measure this demand. Unfortunately, like I said, we're measuring 4 to 6 weeks ago. I don't think this is an accurate representation of what prices are doing this second in many of our market segments. I actually think that they have risen a little bit in many of our market segments. This is our percent active after 14 days in the market. And this is an index where lower is more competitive, right? And again, we've seen this number for our 1 to 2 million, it dropped, and then it's kind of steadily risen. Same thing, though slightly different timing for our under $1 million market, indicating that these markets are a little bit softer trending over time. Again, though, a little bit softer is not the same as soft. And these have been very, very gradual, slow movements. This is not a market that is turned on a dime. It's a market that is just gently trended a little bit softer than it has been earlier in the spring. If we go to our list to close ratio, this is the one that sort of has me baffled, right? Like I like a challenge. I like to try to figure out what's going on. What we have seen here is that consistently and progressively, right? And what I mean by that is people aren't just paying over list price on average for houses. The amount over list has risen over time. So let's jump back in there and look at that, right? When you see people paying over, what this means is it means that there's a fundamental disconnect from where sellers and sellers agents are pricing houses and where the buyers end up on a house. So one of the things we don't know, right, is someone says, oh, so prices just keep going up 5% every month. No, 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 that's not what this chart means. What this chart means is we are trying to look at that disparity between where sellers are pricing and where buyers are buying. And one of the things this means is, it could mean a bunch of things, but one of the things is it could mean that, you know, perhaps sellers are waiting for that other shoe to drop. They want to get a quick sale on their house, so they purposely underprice it a little bit and let the bidding war commence. That's sort of a strategy. And I think I mentioned this last week. That has been sort of the usual in the Bay Area market for quite a bit of time now. You severely underprice houses, everybody knows they're going to go for way more money. I really hope that's not what happens in our market. I think markets function best when you price to where you really think it's going to sell, but I'm not so sure that's what agents and sellers are doing right now. Now, an exception to that, I might have mentioned this before, is in the San Fernando Valley, we have sellers who are up pricing the homes very significantly, and we're noticing that days on market time in that market is going up specifically because I think a lot of sellers are posting what I'd call a make me move price, right? That means my neighbor got 800 grand for his house. Mine is like that. I feel like the market's gone up. I'm going to price mine at $900,000 or over 10% higher. And I'm just going to wait for the market to meet my number. And then I'm going to move. We're not seeing that so much in Orange County. In Orange County, we're seeing people underprice, get a bunch of bids as a strategy. So speaking of days on market, right, for new contracts, this is kind of something interesting. Under $1 million, we are resting in this sort of 18, 19, 20-day zone. And again, remarkably, we have been in this zone since the middle of March, right? We dropped down to this level and it's just sat here. It has not gone up, which tells me inventory constricted market, inventory constricted market. But we see kind of an interesting trend here on our $1 to $2 million homes. They are taking a little bit longer to sell. Back here at the beginning of June, these numbers were almost the same. And look what's happened. This under $1 million market, that has stayed the same. And this 1 to 2 has risen. And it's risen over a few weeks now. We can absolutely call this a trend. We've had enough time. So, we're seeing a little bit of a divergence in that market. And, I find it kind of fascinating. So I really want to see where this number is going to go. And that might tell us a little bit about what people in those higher end homes are doing and what that market is doing. Now, finally, what we have is this kind of affordability number. And this is really what's sort of buoying the market and keeping it busy and keeping that market hot is, even though this is based on our sold data, which we've all acknowledged is 4 to 6 weeks old, even if this number is closer to this $120,000 or 120% figure, I still think, look at this zone. We've been in this zone for months. This is the new normal, right? That the payment on a median priced home will be 10 to 20% higher than it was in June of 2018, 3 years ago. I don't think that that's unreasonable from an affordability perspective. In fact, I think that feels pretty normal. And I think as long as we don't start heading towards 130% or so, I don't think we're in an unhealthy space for our market. At the end of the day, you guys have heard me say this a bunch of times before. Consumers make decisions based on payments. Payments in a healthy market, consumers compare how much it costs to buy a house versus how much it costs to rent a house. That is the comparison that buyers make every single day, trying to decide whether it's worth it, especially at the low end of the market, at the entry level end of the market. At the higher end of the market, consumers actually look to their past performance. They also incorporate this notion of, I've made money on my last house. I want to be in real estate. I want to own real estate. So I look at these affordability figures because I feel like that really is sort of a proxy for the health of our market. How healthy or unhealthy is that market? And that says a lot about the dangers of any kind of a future crash. It also could talk about a future boom. If we go back to this chart here, should this number start to dip for some reason, right? That means we're actually primed for price increase. If it gets down towards this 100% figure, gosh, that means we're ready for prices to go up a whole bunch more, right? Because we're going back to this time in 2018 and saying, what have wages done during that price range? What have rental costs done during that time period? That's really what's kind of sort of a symbiotic relative of our home prices. It all comes down to this notion of being able to make payments. The only time in history, in the recent history at least, where those numbers have gotten completely out of whack on affordability was 2006, 7, and part of 2008. And guess what? We were in trouble, right? So when we see these affordability numbers get wildly out of whack with sort of these reference points, these signposts, how much are rents on these sort of median type houses, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single family? Where are the rents on those homes? Where have wages gone? These are sort of these mile markers of wondering, are we out in no man's land with home prices, or are we right about where we should be with home prices? So jumping back in, just something I always like to put in here, interest rates, they did go up slightly, but I mean, really, we're still at this 3% mark. We have been in this 3% zone almost for 3 months now. The market has just held very, very steady. Obviously, we had a low point at the beginning of the year. That sort of fueled kind of our crazy spring prices. Then things pulled back. You guys know the history, you know the drill. As usual, we love questions, comments. If you're watching this on Facebook, you'll notice we have a link to our YouTube channel. This is where all of our videos show up. We do not post all of our videos to my personal Facebook channel or my personal Facebook page. Half of them get posted to our domicile real estate business page. You should obviously check that out too and like. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell on YouTube. And as always, comment. We love to read your comments. We love to read your questions. And we will see you this Friday for our first time home buyer market update as well. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you soon.